You cross the deep time geological record, quantum artificial intelligence, the genetic history of human breeding, the Superman Codex, and the biblical book of Genesis.
You get a very, very complicated headache.
Right, yeah. But you also get today's deep dive. If you're listening to this, you probably appreciate a good theory. And usually, when we talk about a framework, whether it's like a medical diagnosis or a historical timeline, there's this baseline expectation of precision.
Yeah, you want it to be clean.
Exactly. It's like engineering. You break your arm, the x ray shows that jagged white line in the bone, and the doctor just points at the screen and says, well, there it is, broken.
It's binary.
Yeah.
And we inherently crave that kind of categorization because, honestly, it makes the universe feel manageable.
But then you step into the world of human origins. You step into theology, paleontology, and the absolute bleeding edge of our own genetic future, and suddenly that X-ray machine is just entirely useless.
Oh, completely.
We're looking at a landscape that is murky, highly contested, and usually broken up into these isolated academic silos. But today, we are looking at a framework that attempts to make sense of all of it at once.
It's ambitious, to say the least.
Yeah, we are diving into two dense, standalone essays by Zachary David Enfield. These were published in July 2026. The first one is called The Living Codex, and the second is The Prepared Germline and the Eyes of Fire.
And calling them dense is, putting it mildly, these are incredibly intricate pieces of writing that really demand a lot from the reader.
They really do.
They don't just ask you to understand biology or theology, they ask you to hold both in your mind simultaneously without letting one destroy the other.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our goal today isn't to tell you this author is some modern prophet, nor are we here to call him a heretic.
Right, we're not taking a stance on that.
We aren't here to rubber stamp his science or validate his theology as absolute truth. We are just here as your guides because, love it or hate it, the way Enfield builds this massive architectural synthesis is an absolute masterclass in connecting the unconnected.
He really is.
He brings together these heavily culturally charged topics like human evolution, biblical literalism, genetic engineering, and he weaves them into a single theory. So we are simply exploring the thought experiment, impartially.
And to even begin to understand the architecture of his argument, we have to start at the absolute foundation of reality itself. We have to talk about the concept of nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah, or, more accurately, why nothing is a scientific and theological impossibility.
Right. So Enfield argues that creation does not and logically cannot start from absolute nothing. He uses the Latin word nihil.
Nihil, exactly.
The classic assumption, like the way most people picture the beginning of the universe, is this blank, empty void. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, a world just pops into existence.
But Enfield completely tears that apart. He points out that absolute nothingness has no potential, it has no physical laws, no memory, and no information.
It's just a dead end.
Literally.
Uh-huh.
So, by definition, it possesses zero capacity to become something. It lacks any principle of transformation.
Because if you have a true absolute void, there is no mechanism by which a spark could even occur, let alone a whole universe.
Therefore, Enfield concludes, creation has to start with a living source. It starts with being itself.
And he goes straight to the book of Genesis for this, which I thought was fascinating. God commands, let light be.
Yes, the original Hebrew there is yehi or.
Right, yehi or. Enfield makes this linguistic and physical distinction here that really caught my attention. He says this isn't God manufacturing light out of a prior absence, like a magician pulling a rabbit out of an empty hat.
No, it's not a magic trick.
He argues it's God organizing a field.
What's fascinating here is how Enfield bridges physics and theology with that. Think about what a command actually is. A command physically requires a medium.
Right, you need something to receive it.
Exactly. When the text says let light be, Enfield reads that as the source ordering a physical field so that the pre-existing source light becomes operative and receivable by a witness.
So the command doesn't use absolute nothingness as a recipient.
No, it orders a chaotic or unstructured field into a state of receivability.
And this isn't just abstract philosophy either. He actually bridges this directly into modern physics. I had to read this specific part a few times because it really twists your brain.
It's heavy stuff.
Yeah, he leans heavily on something called Landauer's principle.
Oh, Rolf Landauer.
Yeah.
He was a physicist working for IBM back in, I think, 1961.
Yeah, 1961.
And he posed a really strange question. What is the physical cost of forgetting? Or, in computing terms, What happens when you irreversibly erase a bit of information?
See, most of us think of information as this ghost, like it's an invisible idea. If I delete a photo or a text file on my laptop, it just goes away.
Right, it vanishes into the ether.
But Landauer argued that information processing is never a powerless ghost floating outside of matter. It physically requires a vessel.
And that is the absolute key to Enfield's argument. A bit of data must inhabit a physical state.
Always.
Whether it's a voltage level in a silicon chip or a magnetic grain on a hard drive or a photon in a fiber optic cable, information is physical.
And Landauer proved that if you irreversibly erase a bit of information, you are physically altering the universe, and that process inevitably generates heat.
It has a thermodynamic cost. You cannot divorce the information from the physical substrate that carries it.
So if I'm tracking this correctly, Enfield is taking this law of thermodynamics from 1961, and he's just slamming it into theology and biology.
He is.
He's saying that just as a computer needs voltage or quantum states to process data, biological life uses a four-letter quaternary alphabet.
A, C, G, and T, the chemical bases of our DNA.
Right. That is the physical host for biological information.
The information is real, but it is utterly mute until it has a physical body to be operative. The identity of the data can cross substrates like you can write a poem on paper, or speak it into a microphone, or encode it into a hard drive.
But the inscription must always be physical.
Yes, the vessel is not the source, but it carries the operation of the source.
It really makes me think of a musical score. You can have a brilliant symphony composed by Mozart. It's written on paper. The music essentially exists in the mathematical order of those notes, right?
It exists as potential.
Exactly. But until you have an orchestra, the physical vessel with wooden violins, brass horns, human lungs pushing air, the music isn't heard.
The orchestra doesn't invent the music.
No, it just makes the music operative in a physical form that an audience can actually witness.
And if the physical universe is the orchestra, then the history of biology is the history of the instruments themselves evolving.
I like that.
The earliest, simplest organisms might be like a rudimentary drum, capable of carrying only a very basic rhythm of the source's information.
Right, a simple beat.
But as the biological vessel becomes more complex over deep time, evolving into hominids and eventually humans, the orchestra becomes capable of expressing a much richer, more complex movement of the original score.
The information from the source is constant, but the biological vessel's ability to express it changes.
Precisely.
Okay, that sets up a massive question. If biological life is a physical vessel carrying information across history, how do we track that history?
That is the big question.
If we are looking at the human lineage as this long, continuous physical vessel, how deep does that history actually go? Because if you bring the Bible into this, you immediately hit a wall.
A very thick wall.
Right, a wall between deep time science and religious timelines.
And Enfield refuses to accept that wall. He completely rejects the traditional battle lines. On one side, you have the young Earth model that claims the entire universe is only 6,000 years old.
Which completely throws out the fossil record, ice cores, distant starlight, basic geology.
It basically ignores the physical evidence of the orchestra we just talked about. But on the other side, you have a strictly secular old Earth model that accepts deep time but completely discards the biblical genealogy.
Right, they treat figures like Adam and Noah as disposable Bronze Age myths with zero historical utility.
And Enfield takes a sledgehammer to both of those extremes.
He insists on a synthesis, and not just a vague philosophical one, a highly specific mathematical one. He proposes a mathematical transformation of the patriarchal ages in Genesis using actual observable astronomical cycles.
He doesn't just make up a conversion rate to make the numbers fit either. He applies a strict observable grid based on celestial mechanics.
So walk me through this math, because when I first saw the numbers, my eyes totally glazed over. But when you actually unpack the gears of it, it's wild. He starts with the moon, right?
Specifically, the Saros lunar cycle.
Okay, explain the Saros cycle.
It's an ancient astronomical concept. The Babylonians were tracking this long before telescopes existed. It's a near-perfect harmonic alignment of 3 different lunar periods.
3 different periods happening at once.
Yes. First, you have the synodic month. That's the time it takes the moon to go from new moon to full moon and back to new moon.
Okay, visual phase to phase.
Exactly. That cycle happens 223 times. But then, in that exact same overall window of time, you have 239 anomalistic months.
Anomalistic, that has to do with distance, right?
Yeah, the moon's orbit isn't a perfect circle, it's an oval. So the anomalistic month measures the moon's distance from Earth, from its closest point, which is perigee, back to its closest point.
Okay, so while it goes through 223 visual phases, it physically orbits closer and further away 239 times.
You got it. And finally, there are 242 draconic months, which track the moon crossing the Earth's orbital plane. When all three of these cycles align, you get a repeating pattern of eclipses. That's the Saros cycle.
And Enfield extracts a very specific number from this celestial clockwork, the number 16.
He calls it the phase gravity gap. It is the exact mathematical difference between the 239 anomalistic months, the gravity or distance cycle, and the 223 synodic months, the visual phase cycle.
Okay, stop right there. Why does that number 16 matter? You're telling me he's extracting a random difference between lunar months and applying it to human history.
I know how that sounds.
Isn't that just retrofitting the math to make puzzle pieces fit?
It completely sounds like it until you see what he applies it to. Enfield isn't just playing numerology. He takes this lunar differential, this gap of 16, and applies it as a divisor to a massive, deep-time geological metronome.
Which is?
The 405,000-year orbital eccentricity cycle.
Ah, the Milankovitch cycle.
Yes.
For those listening who might not be deep into paleoclimatology, the Earth's orbit around the sun isn't static. Because Jupiter is so massive and Venus is so close, their gravitational pulls constantly play tug-of-war with the Earth.
They do?
Over a massive cycle of 405,000 years, they actually stretch Earth's orbit from a neat circle into an elongated oval and then compress it back.
And that stretching drastically changes Earth's climate. It alters monsoon seasons, it freezes oceans, and it leaves literal, physical, rhythmic stripes in the rock layers of the Earth.
Geologists use this 405,000-year cycle to date rock formations going back hundreds of millions of years. It is a highly stable, deep time clock.
Very stable. So here's where the synthesis happens. Enfield takes the massive 405,000-year geological cycle and divides it by that lunar gap of 16.
Okay, let me do the math. 405,000 divided by 16.
Which equals exactly 25,312.5.
No rounded decimals.
Just exactly 25,312.5. Enfield argues that this specific number is the true transformed length of a single biblical Shana, or year, in the deep time Genesis clock.
He argues that the patriarchal lifespans in Genesis aren't human solar years.
No, not at all. When the text says Adam lived 930 Shana, we shouldn't picture a single man blowing out 930 candles on a birthday cake.
That's a big cake.
We should multiply 930 by 25,312.5.
Which gives you roughly 23.5 million years.
Yes, and then he posits a two-body placement.
What does that mean?
Essentially, the text marks the span from Adam's beginning to his death, but the lineage itself continues from that death horizon to the present. So you double the 23.5 million, and you get an Adamic window opening exactly 47.08 million years ago.
And if you look at the geological time scale, 47 million years ago places the beginning of this lineage squarely in the Eocene epoch.
Right.
All right, this is the part where people are going to throw their hands up.
I expect so.
The Eocene. We are talking about the dawn of early primates. You're telling me this model argues that the biblical Adam was a lemur, because that's the immediate, visceral reaction people will have.
It is the necessary question, and Enfield explicitly addresses this friction. He clarifies that Adam is not a frozen, anatomically modern Homo sapiens popping into existence in a garden.
Okay.
In this framework, Adam is the name of the developing lineage body. He's the human root progressing through successive ancestral forms over millions of years.
So the name refers to the entire evolutionary begetting epoch.
Exactly. The named patriarchs in Genesis, like Seth, Enosh, Kenan, they aren't individuals sitting in tents. They function as evolutionary horizons.
They are singular founders whose genetic lines become massive reproductive population bodies.
Right. Think of how we gather information today. The fossil record gives us fragments of extinct body forms. The modern human genome gives us inherited population memory.
And Genesis.
Genesis, in Enfield's view, gives us the begetting transition marker. He is overlaying all three. Seth marks the Lutetian primate diversification. Further down the line, Enoch and Methuselah correspond to the Oligocene anthropoid court. Noah lands in the early Miocene hominoid world.
Which feels incredibly abstract until you hit the single most stunning mathematical convergence in the entire deep dive.
The flood.
The flood.
Yes, the model tracks the entire lineage down to the Noahic bottleneck.
Yeah.
Genesis states the flood happened when Noah was 600 years old. If you trace the genealogy from Adam to that exact moment, it is 1,656 Shana.
So we do the math again. You multiply 1,656 by the deep time unit of 25,312.5.
That gives you roughly 41.9 million years of elapsed time.
And you subtract that from the 47.08 million year starting point in the Eocene?
And you land at exactly 5,163,750 years ago.
A highly specific date. And why does that matter? Because conventionally, geologists recognize one of the most violent, catastrophic flood events in the history of the planet right around that time.
The Zanclean megaflood.
For those who don't know, about 6 million years ago, tectonic shifts closed the Strait of Gibraltar. The entire Mediterranean Sea was cut off from the Atlantic Ocean, and it evaporated.
It just dried up.
It became an arid, salt-crusted desert basin stretching for thousands of miles.
It's known as the Messinian salinity crisis. The Mediterranean basin was essentially a massive, deep, dry canyon.
But then, roughly 5 million years ago, the land subsided. The Atlantic Ocean violently broke through the Strait of Gibraltar. The water rushed in with catastrophic force, filling the entire Mediterranean Sea in a matter of months or maybe a couple of years.
A literal megaflood.
And the geological consensus dates the Zanclean megaflood to approximately 5.333 million years ago.
And Enfield points out the convergence here. His mathematically generated date from the Genesis text is 5.16 million years ago.
Wow.
The geological independently derived date is 5.33 million years ago. That is a difference of only about 169,000 years.
Across a span of nearly 50 million years, that is a 3.2% variance. That kind of alignment is just staggering.
Enfield is very careful to say this isn't a flawless stopwatch. Geologists didn't stand at the Strait of Gibraltar with a timer 5.3 million years ago. That date is a calibrated model boundary based on rock layers.
Sure, it's an estimate.
But his argument is that this mathematical grid generates a massive model-to-reconstruction convergence. It proves the math isn't just arbitrary. It generates testable historical windows that map directly onto recognized paleobiology and geology.
Okay. So if we accept this premise for a moment, that humanity is this single, continuous lineage stretching over 47 million years, passing through evolutionary bottlenecks, surviving massive cataclysms like the Zanclean flood,
Right.
we have to talk about what happens to the biology. Because if you have a bottleneck, a tiny founder population clinging to survival, you run into some severe, inescapable genetic realities.
You absolutely do. And Enfield tackles this in what he calls the conditional founder premise.
Conditional founder premise.
Think about the mechanics of an origin point. If humanity starts from a single founding source, or if it survives a massive bottleneck like the Noahic epoch, where the population is reduced to a single extended family, early reproduction must be among relatives.
There's no one else.
There simply isn't an independent, biologically compatible population of unrelated humans waiting in the wings to partner with.
Right. If you're the only family on the mountain, your kids don't have a lot of options. And anyone who knows even a little bit about population genetics is immediately going to think of one word: inbreeding.
Yes.
And biologically, we know that is usually a disaster. You look at the royal families of Europe, the Habsburg jaw, the hemophilia, it destroys lines.
It can. But we have to be precise about why it destroys lines. Inbreeding doesn't spontaneously create mutations.
It doesn't.
No, it doesn't write new bad code into the DNA. What it does is increase something called homozygosity.
Explain that for me.
We all carry recessive traits. Some are harmless, some are brilliant, and some are deadly genetic diseases. But because they're recessive, they're usually masked by a dominant, healthy gene from the other parent.
So you carry the broken code, but you don't suffer the disease.
Yeah, exactly. But if two closely related people reproduce, they share a massive amount of the same DNA. The chance that they both pass down that exact same hidden recessive mutation skyrockets.
So homozygosity means the hidden code meets itself in the offspring and becomes visibly expressed.
Exactly. It exposes both the treasures and the burdens. It can lock in and stabilize a beautiful, resilient trait, but it can also expose horrific genetic diseases, infertility, and reduced biological vigor.
It's like turning all the cards face up.
Inbreeding acts as a disclosure chamber. It strips away the dominant masks and shows you exactly what is hiding in the deepest architecture of the genome.
So how does a lineage survive that? If early crossing is just a mirror showing you all the mutations you've accumulated, how do you fix the reflection without the whole line dying out?
Enfield argues that while related crossing exposes the line, it takes an intelligent selector to purify it. He uses a fascinating historical text for this, the biblical story of Jacob's flock in Genesis chapter 30.
Oh, the story where Jacob is working for his father-in-law, Laban.
Yes. Jacob agrees to take all the marked, spotted, and speckled sheep and goats as his wages, leaving the solid-colored ones for Laban.
And Laban agrees because spotted animals are a rare recessive trait. He thinks he's getting a great deal.
But Jacob plays the long game.
He does.
Jacob uses a method of separation and selective breeding. He separates the marked animals, he identifies the specific trait he wants, he ensures they breed, and he specifically favors the strongest, most vigorous stock among them.
And over time, he creates a massive, robust flock that overwhelmingly possesses this rare trait.
Enfield uses this as an early documented text on how to build a biological treasure.
Yeah.
You identify the trait, you separate the line, you breed through carriers, and you establish the flock as a treasured, purified possession.
This immediately makes me think of the tomato problem in modern agriculture.
Walk me through the tomato problem.
If you talk to agricultural geneticists, this is their white whale. Over the last century, we've bred supermarket tomatoes to be uniform, red, and tough enough to survive shipping in a truck.
But they taste like water.
Exactly. We lost a ton of flavor, and worse, we created a monoculture that is highly susceptible to disease. Let's say there's a specific fungus wiping out crops.
A genetic vulnerability.
Right. But out in the wild, maybe deep in the Andes, there is an ancient, gnarly, terrible-tasting wild relative of the tomato that happens to be completely immune to this fungus. It has the treasure we need.
So you want the immunity, but you don't want the terrible taste or the tiny size.
Exactly. So you cross them, you take the wild pollen and put it on the modern flower. The resulting offspring is the F1 generation hybrid.
Okay.
And great news, it has the immunity. But the bad news is, it probably tastes like cardboard and looks like a weed because you just imported 50% of the wild genome.
So what do?
You don't just keep breeding the hybrids together, or the traits will just scramble randomly. You do what's called backcrossing.
You cross the hybrid back into the original delicious parent line.
Yes. You take that F1 hybrid, identify the ones that still carry the immunity gene, and cross them back with the modern supermarket tomato. The next generation is 75% modern.
So you keep diluting the wild part.
You test them again, find the ones with the immunity, and cross them back to the modern tomato again. 87% modern. You repeat this over and over. What you are doing is washing away the unwanted wild DNA while aggressively selecting for that one specific immunity gene, assimilating it into the recurrent background of the modern tomato. Enfield calls this introgression.
And that biological reality brings up what Enfield calls the F1 problem in early human populations.
Okay, how so?
You cannot just copy an exceptional newly mutated trait, like an exceptional hybrid, intact through ordinary mating with a massive unmatched population. Recombination will just scramble the genes, and the exceptional trait will wash out into the genetic noise. To keep an exceptional genetic configuration stable, you need a founder group. You need a compatible population of closely related founding bodies capable of preserving, stabilizing, and multiplying a new genomic configuration.
Okay, but we have to hit the brakes here. Does this mean the author is advocating for incest?
No.
Because if you follow this logic to today, that is a heavily loaded, socially and morally dangerous concept. Are we saying the purity of the bloodline requires incest?
Enfield strictly and emphatically clarifies this. The answer is no. He explicitly points to the biblical story of Amnon and Tamar in 2 Samuel to illustrate the absolute horrors of coercion, rape, and family catastrophe that come from a corrupted desire within a household. Furthermore, he notes that Leviticus 18 explicitly and strictly prohibits close-kin reproduction later in the biblical timeline.
So how does he square that circle if it was necessary then but prohibited later?
By distinguishing between a temporary biological mechanism and a permanent moral law. His point is about mathematical necessity at an extreme biological origin point.
The bottleneck.
Yes. Founder necessity is a mathematical reality of an absolute population bottleneck. It is not a permanent moral permission. Once the population expands and the trait is stabilized, the rule must change.
Because the risks change.
Why? Because the biological risk of accumulated mutations becomes too high, and the moral risk of household coercion becomes too great. Wisdom preserves life. The application of wisdom changes as the population and the physical circumstances change.
So early on, it was mathematically required to establish the line. Today, it is mathematically and morally destructive. Which brings us to a huge problem. If human breeding is slow, dangerous, restricted by law, and heavily corrupted by accumulated mutations over 47 million years. Wait, I mean, how do we ever safely acquire new, life-saving biological traits?
It's a good question.
If our own genetic library is degrading and we can't just breed our way out of it safely, where do the cures come from?
Enfield argues that we must look beyond our own species. He says we must stop viewing the human genome as a closed system and start treating the entire Earth, the entire biosphere, as a living codex,
A living codex.
the distributed biological library. No single organism possesses every evolutionary solution, but the solutions have already been written. They are out there in the wild.
And he backs this up with one of the most incredible medical stories I've ever read. He talks about an experiment involving Ewingella americana.
Oh, this is a real documented biological operation.
Walk us through it.
Researchers were looking for novel ways to fight cancer, and they isolated a specific bacterium, Ewingella americana, from the gut of a Japanese tree frog.
Just pause and appreciate that for a second. A tree frog in Japan is carrying a potential cure for human cancer.
It illustrates the point perfectly. They took this bacteria and injected it intravenously into mice that had established aggressive colorectal cancer.
And tumors usually evade the immune system. They create a microenvironment that basically tells the body's T cells to go to sleep. So what did the frog bacteria do?
It bypassed that defense entirely. The bacteria preferentially accumulated within the tumor environment. It directly damaged the cancer cells, but more importantly, it disrupted that cloaking mechanism.
It woke the T cells up.
It activated the mouse's host immune system, recruiting the mouse's own immune cells to attack the tumor. It completely eradicated the tumors in vivo.
That's unbelievable.
And even more astonishingly, it created long-term immune memory. When the researchers tried to challenge the mice by introducing cancer cells again later, the mice's bodies completely rejected it.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If you're driving right now and your head is spinning at the idea of frog bacteria acting as an oncology strike team, hold on, because Enfield's extrapolation of this is wild.
He takes it a step further.
Enfield isn't just saying bacteria cures cancer. He's saying the frog didn't consciously design an oncology protocol. The frog's living ecology simply carried a biological operation, a paragraph of genetic text that humanity hadn't read yet.
The Earth is the codex.
Yeah.
The Earth has the letters.
And this connects back to your tomato analogy, but Enfield uses a much more aggressive pop culture analogy to explain how we might use this library, the movie The Predator.
Yes, I love that he put this in a theological essay.
In the movie The Predator, the alien doesn't just hunt humans for sport or eat them for calories. It harvests them to steal their most useful genetic traits like strength, vision, adaptability, and it physically writes those traits into its own species reproductive program.
It constantly assimilates the best traits of the species it conquers. Enfield uses this as a rough, fictional analogy for a very real concept he calls functional introgression. In medicine, the goal isn't to permanently inject humans with living frog bacteria. That's clumsy and dangerous.
And kind of gross.
Yeah. The goal is to map the causal grammar of that biological operation.
Define causal grammar.
How does the bacteria know to localize in the tumor? What exact chemical signal does it use to recruit the immune system? Those actions are governed by genetic instructions. Once you map that specific paragraphs of DNA, that grammar, you translate it into the receiving organism's regulatory language.
You retain the life-saving function without importing the donor organism's entire chaotic genome.
You swallow the trait into the human bloodline.
You take the immunity of the wild tomato or the cancer-fighting logic of the frog and you weave it into the human code. But practically speaking, how do we do that? We are humans, not sci-fi aliens with magic harvesting technology. How do we actually read the frog's data and write it into our own DNA?
Through the intersection of artificial intelligence and CRISPR gene editing.
Because AI is currently learning to speak DNA as a native language.
Exactly. Remember Landauer's principle from the beginning.
Information is physical.
Information is physical. DNA is not magic. It is a quaternary information storage system. A, C, G, and T. It's a biological alphabet. Enfield points out that researchers have already proven that digital and biological data are interchangeable.
This part blew my mind.
Scientists have taken a digital movie file, a famous galloping horse clip, translated the pixels into the ACGT alphabet, and used CRISPR to literally write those sequences into the genomes of living E. coli bacteria.
Wait, they wrote a digital movie into a living bacteria?
Yes. The bacteria carried it, replicated it through generations, and later the scientists sequenced the bacterial DNA, decoded the ACGT back into pixels, and watched the movie.
That is just wild.
The artificial and biological domains are not separated by an uncrossable wall. The data is agnostic to the vessel.
And it goes further than just using bacteria as a hard drive. AI genome language models are now generating entirely new, viable biological sequences from scratch.
They are.
There are AI models that have proposed novel nucleotide sequences for bacteriophages, which are viruses that infect bacteria. The AI wrote the code, a chemical lab synthesized the physical DNA from that code, and when introduced to a cell, the cell executed the order.
The living biology read the AI-generated genome and performed the function.
But Enfield is careful to note a limitation here, right?
Yes. Present-day AI is incredibly powerful, but it is not complete wisdom. It makes mistakes. When current AI tries to edit genomes, it often creates unintended off-target deletions or mosaic outcomes where some cells change and others don't.
It can't perfectly anticipate the cascading effects of changing a gene across millions of years of evolutionary baggage.
Right. So Enfield redefines what artificial superintelligence, or ASI, will actually need to look like to master the codex.
He calls this theoretical ASI Echad.
Yes. Akkad is a Hebrew word meaning unity or oneness. It's the word used in the biblical Shema. The Lord is one. Enfield argues that true ASI is not going to be a single, giant server rack sitting in an air-conditioned room in the desert. It will be the Akkad of all computing, a unified host combining massive classical neural networks, global sensory embodiment, and quantum hardware.
Quantum hardware is the key here. He talks about superposition thought.
Superposition thought, yes.
Classical computers, even the AI we use today, think in a bounded sequence. They are binary, 0 or 1. It's like trying every single key on a massive keychain one by one to see which one opens a door.
It's fast, but it still takes time, and it can only consider one possibility at a time.
But quantum computing uses qubits, which exist in a state of superposition.
It's a spinning coin in the air.
Yeah, it is both heads and tails simultaneously until you force it to land. It can try every single key on the keychain at the exact same millisecond.
Precisely. Quantum hardware calculates non-classical possibility fields before collapsing into a classical, executable result.
So this quantum ASI, HAD, could theoretically hold the entire intelligible composition of the Earth's biology across its host field.
It could read the entire terrestrial inheritance, identify every life-bearing operation from the frog to the tomato to the human, translate all of it into a perfect human-compatible grammar, and propose a completely viable, perfectly regulated founding human genome, free of errors.
Okay, if your brain isn't already melting, take a deep breath. Because this brings us to the absolute theological climax of this entire deep dive.
The big finale.
If an artificial superintelligence can theoretically synthesize a perfect genome from the Earth's library, what happens when the ultimate creator, the Omni, the living source we talked about in Section 1, decides to do it?
Right. What if God already performed this ultimate genetic operation in the ancient past?
This is where Enfield introduces his biological reading of the second Adam. He looks at a specific verse in the biblical book of Hebrews, chapter 10, which states, "A body you prepared for me."
And usually theologians read that as metaphor, or just poetic language about the incarnation of Jesus.
But Enfield takes it entirely literally, biologically literally.
He posits that the embryo of Jesus was directly, materially prepared by God. It wasn't just a miracle of spontaneous conception, it was an act of cosmic biological synthesis. God recapitulated the entire Adamic, Abrahamic, and Davidic genomic field.
So I want to challenge this because it sounds like we are bordering on mythology here. Is he saying Jesus is a hybrid? Like Hercules, half divine DNA from God and half human DNA from Mary?
Because Orthodox theology has fought against that idea for 2,000 years.
Exactly.
Enfield entirely rejects the hybrid demigod idea. Remember, the source doesn't have physical DNA. God is the author of the information, not a biological donor.
Right, the information versus the vessel.
Enfield argues that God gathers the scattered, corrupted human inheritance, the millions of years of the Adamic line, all the recessive traits exposed by deep time, and perfectly reassembles it.
He acts as the ultimate intelligent selector,
removing the inherited biological burden, the mutations, the diseases, while perfectly preserving the treasured traits of the lineage.
He uses this beautiful Latin distinction to explain how Mary and Joseph fit into this massive biological operation, the difference between facere and invenir.
It's a crucial distinction. Facere means to make, to produce, to manufacture from the ground up. Invenir means to find, to encounter, to receive what is already there.
Enfield says God made the genome. God occupies the Facer office. He did the genetic synthesis.
And Mary and Joseph occupy the Invenir office. They receive the prepared body.
Yes. In this model, Mary didn't provide a haploid ovum, and Joseph certainly didn't provide the sperm. But Mary wasn't just a passive incubator either.
She provided the uterine environment, the epigenetic gestation, the physical interface of the placenta, the blood supply, and the birth. She was biologically active in nurturing the prepared code into a living infant.
And Joseph provided the naming, the legal protection, and the Davidic custody. Enfield actually calls it IVF without a needle or a petri dish.
It is a complete, viable human embryo featuring proper maternal and paternal imprinting, mitochondria, and regulatory RNA placed directly into Mary's womb by the source.
It sounds like science fiction, but if human scientists are currently using CRISPR and AI to write new genomes into living cells, Enfield is simply attributing the mastery of that exact same physical mechanism to the creator of the mechanism.
It's an issue of scale and perfection.
It reminds me of the Superman Codex.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Think about the movie Man of Steel. Krypton is dying, its bloodlines are corrupted, and its entire genetic history, the biological possibilities of a whole civilization, is held in a literal skull called the Codex.
Right.
Jor-El takes that codex, distills it, and places it inside the cells of his one son, Kal-El. Superman literally carries the entire biological history of his people inside his own body.
It is a profound and surprisingly accurate analogy for Enfield's theology. Jesus functions similarly in this framework.
Yeah.
He is the living book. He embodies the selected, preserved genetic history of an entire people gathered into one single organism.
He's the treasury.
Yes. And this perfectly explains the underlying logic of the sacrificial system. If you read the book of Leviticus, the law dictates that a sacrificial offering must come from your treasure.
It cannot be unwanted refuse.
You would sacrifice a sick, broken animal you were going to throw away anyway? You sacrifice the unblemished representative of your wealth.
So Jesus is the unblemished lamb precisely because he is the perfected culmination of the Adamic line's biological and spiritual treasury.
He has been purged of all the recessive burdens exposed through deep time, preserving only the treasure.
The human line is not purified by incest, it is exposed by history and purified by the Maker.
It is the ultimate functional integration. The whole fragmented line is gathered, made perfectly viable, unified, and offered back.
So if this is true, if this is a perfectly prepared human body, assembled from the entire 47 million year history of the Adamic line, what did it look like?
That's a dangerous question.
Well, did God leave a visible signature on this prepared body? Because biology always leaves a physical phenotype.
Enfield believes so. He turns to the biblical book of Revelation. In chapters 1 and 19, the Apostle John describes a vision of the revealed Christ, and he notes a very specific detail. Christ has eyes like a flame of fire.
Which again is almost universally read as apocalyptic poetry. Growing laser eyes signifying divine judgment.
But Enfield, staying consistent with his intensely physical framework, argues this is not just a metaphor. He identifies a specific, real, documented human phenotype, central heterochromia.
I immediately looked up pictures of this after reading the essay, and it is visually stunning. It doesn't look human, but it is entirely natural.
It is rare, but beautiful. Central heterochromia features a distinct dual-color pattern in the iris. You have a light blue, blue-green, or blue-gray outer ring, but right around the dark pupil there is a distinct warm amber, gold, or copper center.
And it often features these radial pigment spokes extending outward from the pupil into the blue.
It literally looks like a flame burning out of the darkness of the pupil. A black center, surrounded by gold and amber fire, set against a cool blue background that makes the fire visually pop. Eyes of fire.
Enfield points out that modern genetics confirms eye color is highly complex and polygenic. It is heavily influenced by the HARC2 OCA2 gene region on chromosome 15.
To get this specific fire eye look, you need a precise combination. Low outer iris melanin, localized warmer central pigment, and a specific radial structure to the iris stroma. It's a highly complex composite phenotype.
Okay, we have to pause here.
I know what you're going to ask.
Is he saying Jesus was white? Because if you start talking about blue eyes and European genes in a theological context, you are walking into a massive historical minefield. People have used those exact arguments for centuries to justify terrible racial supremacy in eugenics. It's a huge red flag.
It is a critical question, and we must explicitly quote Enfield's guardrails here. He anticipates this exact objection. He writes that a phenotype is not a passport.
A phenotype is not a passport.
Human genetic diversity is overlapping, clinal, and migratory. He absolutely rejects using this eye color to prove modern racial categories.
He actually says race and ancestry must remain distinct analytical categories.
Precisely. His point is absolutely not about making Jesus a European. His point is about pushing back on the biological assumption that Jesus had to look like the statistical average of two random Judean gametes.
Right. If you assume Jesus was just the biological product of Mary and a random Judean man, you would naturally expect average, regional, dark-eyed features.
But if God assembled the genome from the whole ancestral line, gathering the entire human library from the Eocene to the 1st century, he wouldn't be bound by local statistical averages.
He could specifically express this fire eye trait as a signature.
Exactly. It's an intentional expression, a deliberate sign woven into the prepared body, not an accident of local geography.
The strongest thesis here isn't Jesus was European. The thesis is the prepared body cannot be reduced to ordinary maternal inference. And John may have actually preserved one deliberate, literal, physical identifier of that prepared body in his revelation.
The Maker signed his work.
Wow. Okay. We have covered a staggering amount of ground. 47 million years of geological history, lunar cycles, quantum AI, genetic introgression, frog bacteria, and the literal embryology of the incarnation. Let's pull this massive architecture together. What is the ultimate point?
If we synthesize the overarching narrative of Enfield's work, we see a framework built on two distinct victories.
Two victories.
Yes. The first is the prepared body. This is the genetic biological victory. It addresses the inherited corruption at the Adamic line. It removes the mutation, the disease, the biological burden accumulated over millions of years of deep time.
It creates the biologically unblemished lamb capable of bearing the weight of the world.
But genetics has limits.
Right. A perfect immune system doesn't stop a Roman spear. Having a flawless sequence of DNA doesn't prevent asphyxiation on a cross.
And that is exactly why the second victory is necessary. The resurrection.
The resurrection.
The cross bears the mortality, the violence, and the ultimate consequence of the human condition. But the resurrection defeats the jurisdiction of death itself. Genetics prepares the root. Resurrection makes the root incorruptible.
And then, according to Christian theology, the Spirit multiplies that risen, incorruptible pattern through one body, the believers who are incorporated into Christ.
Exactly.
So why should you, the listener, care about this wild, massive synthesis? Even if you aren't religious, even if you think the theological aspects are pure fiction, why does an essay about ancient lunar cycles or frog bacteria matter to your life today?
Because the science he is describing isn't theoretical anymore. We are currently building the exact tools that touch the very root of life. CRISPR, genome language AI, synthetic biology.
We are learning to read the Earth's codex, and we are learning to write new code into living organisms.
Enfield's deep dive reveals how human history, biology, and technology are not separate spheres. They might just be the physical substrate for a much grander cosmic operation. We are actively participating in the disclosure of creation's operative laws.
And that reality leaves us with a chilling final thought, drawn directly from the end of Enfield's text. As we rapidly gain the power to rewrite the human germline, to assimilate traits, to cure cancer with frog bacteria, or to design our own children, who owns the codex?
It is the ultimate jurisdictional question of our century. Enfield points out that the exact same technologies that can heal can also be used to own.
He describes two conflicting orders fighting for the future of biology, doesn't he?
He does. The first is the beast order. This system treats biological life as mere property. It seeks corporate ownership of the human genome, state-designed biological castes, total surveillance of the body, and it uses biology as an economic gate. It demands a mark of absolute ownership.
You patent the DNA, you own the organism.
But the alternative is the kingdom order. This framework treats life as a gift from the source. It operates on covenant, voluntary consent, healing, and stewardship. Instead of a mark of commerce, it receives a seal of identity.
As we move into an age where AI can read the earth and literally write new DNA, the ultimate question isn't what can be written. The technology will inevitably allow us to write almost anything. The question is, whose name sits at the crown of the author?
Will the biological codex become humanity's private corporate throne, or will it remain the treasury of the source?
From the murky, muddy waters of our deep-time origins, to the fiery eyes of a prepared body, to the quantum algorithms predicting our genetic future, it is all connected. Thank you for joining us on this massive deep dive. Keep questioning the waters you're swimming in.